Join us for another discussion on democratizing business capital in the securities legal space. I'm Elizabeth, managing attorney of Elizabeth L. Carter, Esquire LLC, which is also the host of this interview series entitled Democratizing Business Capital, hashtag Black Capital Matters, with sponsorship by Law for Economic Democracy. I am also joined by Shanique Ross, law clerk for the law firm Elizabeth L. Carter Esquire LLC, and third-year law student at John Marshall Law School at University of Illinois in Chicago. Shanique will assist me with the Q&A portion of the interview, which will also occur during the final 15 minutes. So we ask that you all reserve your questions or put your questions in the chat and reserve them at the end, and we'll address them then. So the purpose of this interview series is to help democratize business capital through an exposition of Black capital in all its varieties. More specifically, we hope to increase representation of Black investors, small businesses, and capital formation intermediaries within the business capital space, which, by the way, is in desperate need of racial equity. This is especially true where Black businesses remain systematically under-resourced, especially in light of COVID. It has been reported that COVID-19 forced 41% of Black-owned businesses to close compared to just 17% of white-owned businesses. This is in part due to insufficient institutional support of Black businesses, including the PPP loan program. Thus, in order to help solve this crisis, Black businesses will need greater access to investors and capital structures designed to counter the systematic issues faced by this group. So for the second installment of the interview series, we would like to introduce McKeever, quote unquote, Mac Conwell. Mac is the managing director of Rare Breed Ventures. Rare Breed Ventures is a pre-seed fund that invests in exceptional founders outside of the large tech ecosystem. Mac was formerly the manager of the Minority Business Pre-Seed Fund, which was in part created through a partnership between TEDCO, which stands for Maryland Technology Development Corporation, which provides entrepreneurship funding, resources, and connections to early stage tech companies that are in Maryland. And McKeever was the manager of the Harbor Banking Development Corporation to address the needs of minority entrepreneurs in Maryland. I'm sorry, it was a partnership between Harbor Bank, right? Right? Harbor Bank and TEDCO, right.
It was a partnership between Harbor Bank and TEDCO, yeah.
Exactly, right. So, and your prior work, or McKeever's prior work, includes several years as a government contractor and the CEO of 2 startups, including one that he sold to a Fortune 100 company. Wow. Welcome, man.
Thank you. Appreciate the introduction.
Yeah, and I'm super excited for this conversation. You and I have spoken before, and I mean, it was basically like an interview there, asking questions like, so intrigued with the work that you do and why you do it. So I thought I'd love to share my own sort of intriguedness with others on this for the interview series, and thought you would be a great person to have. Again, I think this is a topic that is so important in our community, so important in the Black community, the broader community, just minority and people of color in general. So I'm just looking forward to really just diving right in. Are you ready?
Yeah, you're about to put me on the hot spot, about to give me a whole bunch of hard questions, but it's all good. I'm good. I'm here. Let's get it. Let's make it happen.
All right, cool. So, all right, this should be an easy one. How did you get into the startup space, and how did you know to create a startup that was Fortune 100 status?
So the way I got into the startup space is tied to my career as a government contractor, right? So when I was a sophomore in college, I got into an internship program with the Department of Defense. I got top secret clearance, and it was the student program, had like maybe 200 students. Another 200 students, like 25 of us were Black. So of course, all the Black kids hung together. The unique thing about this program was everybody in the program was either a computer science major or electrical engineering major, right? So it's nothing but engineers. And so that became my core group of friends. Like these, and everybody who was Black either came from an HBCU, or historically Black college or university, or from an Ivy League school. Like that was it. That was the only thing you see. And so that became my core group of friends, of these like very successful, well-educated engineers who have who went on to have very high paying jobs. And one of them happened to be a gentleman by the name of Patrick Jackson. Patrick was obsessed with being the Black Mark Zuckerberg. Like he is the reason why I learned how to code in PHP, because MySpace was in PHP. He was the first person I see build like an iPhone app, like back in like 07, 08, like back when like the App Store was like brand new kind of a thing. Builds his first website. and all this stuff. And he was also the first one out of us to quit his job and move to San Francisco. So today, Patrick's the CTO of a company called Disconnect. They do VPNs for cell phones. And so him being one of my closest friends sparked something with a group of us. And so it ended up being like 6 or 7 of us all ended up starting our own businesses, right? And it was all from the catalyst of like having this one friend who was talking about it. We all figured like, well, we have the skill set to do that. So we can do that too. Um, and then from there, it was just all a learning process. Because like when we started it, we knew what Facebook was. We didn't know what a startup was, right? We didn't know what VCs were or investors were, all that other stuff. So like had to learn all that stuff along the way. So the fact that my company got bought by a Fortune 100 company, I was like, it just happened.
It just happened. Which seemed to be like what the industry was, right? It just seemed like these companies just came out of nowhere and became highly super successful fast. Is that the nature of startups? Is that what it's about? Is it something that you gotta, if you're thinking about it, if you think too hard, it won't be successful because you're thinking too hard about it? Like, what is this?
It feels like those companies become really successful really fast, but they're really just businesses, right? And like starting a business is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Like on average, it's going to take a business to like to get to like real like the level of success that we of all the companies that we see and know. We're talking about like 10, 15 years out, right? Like you're going to put a lot of time and dedication into these things.
Yeah.
And when you think about it from like a fundraising perspective, I believe is a company's going to raise $89 million from the start to the time it exits. That means either getting acquired or going public. So that means that $80 million accounts for probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 rounds of funding.
Wow.
Like it is a slog. It is a process. But that's still faster than, in typical businesses, like traditionally, like, like if you start a franchise or if you start a small business, to grow to the point where you could be worth $1 billion, you're talking like 20, 30, 40 years. Whereas, a fast growth tech business, you're trying to get there in like 7 to 12, right? So that's where the speed aspect comes in. But like when you think about 7 to 12 years, it ain't that quick. I guess those are years of your life. It's some real work.
Right. Especially if that's all you're doing, right? You're sacrificing a lot to get there, right? And thank you for, clarifying the difference between startup and small business, because I think a lot of people get that confused or use them interchangeably, right? And so can you explain a little further what it means to be a small business versus startup business? You gave one example in terms of the length in terms, but also like what is the intent behind these businesses and what is the long-term goals for these businesses?
So if you're thinking like a startup or like a company that's going to be venture backed, that's going to get venture capital funding, professional investors who are putting money in for equity, those investors are going to be looking to get returns on their money within typically a 10-year or maybe a little bit longer time span, which means you have to be building a company that's growing fast enough to get acquired or go public within that time frame. Most businesses aren't going to fit that framework, right? So almost any other business outside of that, doesn't, we call them small businesses or lifestyle businesses. They're typically just businesses that grow slower, right? There's nothing wrong with it, right? But like, if you have a business and you're 7 years out and you're doing 25 million in revenue and you can pay yourself 3-4 million a year, that's a pretty good lifestyle. It's a good business, right? That's a business that's going to be moving too slow for a venture capitalist or professional investor, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, right? And so like we typically call them lifestyle businesses because you can have a really healthy lifestyle, because those businesses typically aren't going to grow fast enough or strong enough to say, let's say, have 4,000 or 25,000 employees, over the next 20 years, right? So like that's the fundamental difference, right? And people get upset about that and things like, why won't VCs invest in my company? And it's really just a time frame thing, right? It's just the way the incentives are aligned. Because at the end of the day, me as a venture capitalist, I'm nothing but a glorified financial advisor, right? People give me their money to make them more money over a 10-year time span. And legitimately, they're giving me their money to make more money than they would if they just put it in the stock market, right? Like if you're doing pretty well, you should be able to get somewhere between 8 to 10% return putting your money in the stock market. So my job is I need to get you higher than that.
Wow, right. And probably short amount of time too, right?
Well, no, because like if you have your money in the stock market, it's liquid, right? Like, you can pull that out if you
True.
need to. You give money to me. Venture capital is a subset of private equity, so we're an alternative asset class. Our money is highly illiquid. Like, we don't get money back until a company has a point where it goes public or gets acquired. There's some nuances in there, but generally speaking, like, we gotta wait till you do something. And like, if you
Right.
never do anything, then like that
No
money's just
liquidity.
gone.
Right. So okay, let's talk about VC. And you again giving some primers on it. It sounds like
I know I'm messing up
VC
your questions.
No, not at all. Not at all. You're actually helping me, right? But no, so VC, venture capital, explain its position in private equity, explain its position just in overall small or business funding support. So as we talk about traditional banking or loans, or even sort of the private investment that someone would have with an angel investor, kind of put it in context. What is VC or venture capital?
So venture capital is a subset of private equity, and private equity is alternative asset classes, right? So that means you're buying, um, you're buying into like portions of private companies instead of public, right? So it's not bonds or public companies. You're buying into private industries, um, and so venture capital is a very small subset of private equity, right? So like a great example is, a small private equity fund might be like $60 billion.
A small
A
one.
large venture capital fund might be $5 billion.
Wow. Okay.
So there's the difference there, but 40% of the companies that are publicly traded have gotten venture funding. So even though venture capital is a very small portion of the financial world, they account for very large impact and can get to really outsized returns, which is why people participate in venture capital, right? In terms of like financing from a business standpoint, you got your traditional financing of getting loans at banks, but those are person guaranteed money you need to repay. You then have angel investors, which just means it's somebody investing their own personal money, which means they can invest for whatever reason they want. They can go about it however they want. It's their money. They can do whatever they want with it. Versus a venture capitalist, we're investing other people's money, so we're doing this professionally as a job, right? So the way we approach is slightly different. But at the end of the day, it's still an investment, which means if anything ever happens to your company, you don't owe us anything. That money's just gone. And actually, to be quite honest, whenever we make an investment, we almost expect that to happen. Like, I know going in that 70 to 75% of the companies I invest in will never return me any capital. Like, I just already know that. Like, that's just going in. I just know like 70, 75% of y'all are just going to go straight to zero.
But the risk and the reward, so obviously the higher percentage of returns is counting for that risk, right?
Right, which is also the reason why, as a venture capitalist, I can only invest in companies that have the potential to get to $1 billion valuation.
Wow.
Right, because of the $1 billion valuation, I'll be able to get some significant returns because I need that large significant return to offset the 70 to 75% of the companies that fail. And not, fail is not the right word, but just never return capital, right? So to offset that, I have to believe that every company I invest in has the potential to get to $1 billion valuation. Wow. Right? Just so I can offset things.
So what type of business is that? So diving more deeper into VC funding and what type of business they fund, what type of businesses will get you to $1 billion valuation before that exit mark or before that acquisition or going public? Is that what you're waiting for before that 10-year period is up, or?
Yeah,
okay.
That's what, and I would say, I mean, there's so many different businesses out there, but really fundamentally, it has to be a business in a market that can support a company being worth $1 billion, right? Like if you're in an industry where the entire industry accounts for like 500 million, you're never going to get there because like your industry didn't even support that, right. And you're never going to be 100% of the industry, right?
Right.
Which exactly. Is also why, like, investors like things like B2B SaaS. So like, in a business market, that business, like depending on like the industry might account for, let's say $20 billion. Right. Okay. So if there's a $20 billion market opportunity, if you get, 10% of that market means you're doing pretty well. That's a $2 billion company, on the flip side, some people really like, um, investing in medical or like in therapeutics, because like if you find cure to cancer, we're all going to get rich, right? But like if you find a more effective um, flu shot, like that's going to go to millions, if not billions, of people. We can all get really rich off of that. Right?
Right.
Versus if you're building a product, let's say, if you're building a tool to support project managers in the record industry,
Okay.
right? How many project managers are there in the record industry?
Right.
Let's just say there's 50,000, right? And let's say you're selling your product for $100 a person. That means the maximum amount of money you can make in a given year is $5 billion. It's just not an industry I can get excited about.
The industry, right. Okay. So okay, let's talk about that a little more. So let's talk about Black VC in the context of Black venture capital and Black businesses. So right,
okay.
So how does so how and I necessary, right? I don't know. I was going to say a quote a song, but so what? Comparing, we just talked about VC in general. Where does Black VC fit into that? What makes it Black, right? I mean, clearly we can say the obvious, your presence, but is it a different metric systems, a different sort of target standpoint when it comes to businesses? And then in a follow-up question to that, when we talk about these billion-dollar business or the industries being worth billions of dollars, what particular industries do you see Black businesses being part of that is also part of that billion-dollar wave, right? That makes sense for a VC to invest in them. So two-part, what is Black VC? What makes it Black? And then like sort of the metrics, and then also what do you see the Black industry looking like to be able to sort of receive that type of funding?
The only thing that makes Black VC Black is my skin tone.
Okay.
Like, ain't nothing different, right? The job is the job. The companies are the company. Ain't nothing different. Now, the metrics that other people hold me to might be different, but I can't control that, right?
Okay.
But being a Black VC just means we Black people in VC. That's all it means. Okay. Ain't nothing else there, right?
Okay.
Same thing for companies. Like for companies, Black companies looking for VC, like they're just ran by Black people. The biggest difference, generally speaking, is the difference in networks, right? Like you're not going to have as many Black-led startups or even Black VCs who have gone to Ivy League schools or who have networks of people that they know who are friends that are, wealthy or well connected, right? So that's where the biggest difference comes in. But like at the end of the day, like it is what it is. The business is the business, right? Like it's just because I'm Black. Like at the end of the day, I'm still a VC. Like I do the same thing everybody else does, right? In terms of industries, though, that's where stuff gets interesting, right? Because like it's a lot easier to understand and make a bet on an industry, right? And so that's why for a long time we didn't see any funding going to companies catering to Black hair care, because the majority of investors like aren't Black and don't deal with Black hair issues, right? So they have no concept of how large of an industry or how much money is spent there, no matter how many times you tell them the numbers. Like it doesn't make sense.
You look at the research.
Until Shea Moisture, gets acquired, and then that becomes a big deal, right? And now it's like, oh, there's room for that. There's a behemoth here, and there's room for so many more. And so I think we're going to see a lot more in that kind of space. Like almost any industry that's culturally relevant to a specific culture tends to get overlooked, right? Because one, if it's targeting a specific culture, then it's almost already deemed as too small of an audience, right? It's the same thing we see in media and other things, right? Like we can't make a Black movie. We can't get $1 billion box office making a Black movie. White people won't go see it. And then you get Black Panther. It's like, oh. Or like, if you look at a show like Insecure is a show on HBO specifically made and targeted to Black women. 40% of their viewership come from non-Black women.
Interesting.
Because good stories are good stories. Go figure, People like good stories.
Right.
And so in venture, we very often see that when people are building products for specific specific cultures or communities, if that community is not a white community, because white people are the majority, it is automatically deemed as small, right? And so that's where you get into issues. And so I'm very bullish on products in spaces like that. So like there are millions of industries out there. So it's hard to just like pick one, but like the black hair care was like the greatest example because like everybody's talking about it now. Like it's a hot thing. To the point where I think it's oversaturated. but you know, the point is, you know, whenever you see a founder and they mention like, oh, this is for Latinos, or this is for Black peoples, or this is for people in Texas, right? They are like those products are automatically deemed like, oh, you're going after a small market. I can't do this.
Right. So then that kind of explains, and maybe not the full story, why only 1% of venture capital funding went to Black founders, and what 0.0006%, virtually zero, went to Black women founders. You think about hair care or different needs that, or the industries that Black women may find themselves in. Would you say that's why, in terms of United States, in terms of majority, in terms of population United States, and the networks, like you mentioned before, are heavily dominated by white male or Ivy League or, you know, these type of sort of exclusionary environments? Is that, so it seems like that's what it is that in their mind, those industries or those people, we don't need to cater to their needs because they won't bring enough return in terms of the billion-dollar valuations that we're looking for because it's too small. Is that what the main thing is, or you think it's something else going on?
No, it's more than that, because that fundamentally assumes that all these Black startups are catering to Black people, and that's not what it is, right? I mean, because that's part of it, right? But there's a bunch of pieces, and so the bigger pieces, from what I've experienced, is one, the lack of education around how venture works and the lack of understanding how it works. And so what we see very often is minority founders go out to raise money too early. And what happens is they go out to raise money and then they have a bunch of investors tell them they're too early. And then they go to TechCrunch and they see a white guy from Stanford get $2 million before they've even built anything and be like, he's building a product in the exact same industry I am. I've done more. I have more traction. Why won't anybody fund me? Here's the problem with that, right? We're not comparing apple to apples, because if you see somebody get funding pre-product or pre-revenue, 9 times out of 10, they did not get that funding for their product. They got that funding because of their network. You don't have that network, so you cannot compare yourself to them, right? You can be upset that you don't have that network, and you know, that's a whole nother issue, right? But like, because you don't have that network, you're going to be evaluated on your business. And if I had to evaluate your business and that white guy from Stanford's business, I wouldn't invest in either one of you, because neither one of your businesses are ready for that, right? And so when you don't have those network connections, you fundamentally have to build the business to be ready to raise capital. Because at the end of the day, as a professional investor, I sell rocket fuel. What I do is I give rocket fuel. I give you the tool to go faster. And so the problem is, my rocket fuel does nothing for a plane that's in a bunch of pieces. Like if you're building a rocket ship and your rocket ship is in a bunch of pieces or I don't have no wheels on it yet, my rocket fuel don't do nothing for you. But if you got a rocket ship that's flying and you say, Mac, I can use some rocket fuel to go faster, well, then we can have a conversation. And so because there's this narrative out there that investors give money to help you get started because they like you, people think that's what the industry actually is. That's not how this works. That's not fundamentally what the industry is. And so founders go out to raise money. Minority founders very often go out to raise money too early, and they find it difficult. And then they keep getting told they're too early. And so then they have to figure out how to build their product when they should have did that from the beginning. And by the time they have built their product, they've done some accelerators, they've done a bunch of pitch competitions and all this other stuff to try to cobble some money together to get moving. And now they're 2 or 3 years behind where their counterparts are, right? And so that's where the difficulty comes in. And also, like, the idea of trying to build a company for 2 or 3 years to get to the point where you're ready for venture funding, that's a lot of work. You can imagine how many people don't get that far along in the process. I mean, It took me 2.5, almost 3 years before we got to the point where anybody was even considering giving my first company any money, right? That's because I didn't understand the game or how this worked. For my second company, I got money really fast and really easy. But then again, for my second company, I had a network. I had people I could go to who knew me, who had seen my work before. And that was easy.
Right. So let's talk about that.
That's why you see that.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So, because you got right, it seems like the biggest crux in your opinion is just the access to the network, which I mean, in other words, access to the money, or the trust, the culture that's there, that's surrounding that money. How can Black founders have access, and how did you do it, and how can others in a similar situated do the same? And I guess the follow-up question is the energy that takes to do that, and maybe it's not a lot of energy. You'll let us know. Is there an alternative to, or is there a better route that Black founders can go towards getting funding than this sort of this the accelerator, like you said, this constant sort of pitch, and then you're like, how did you build a network, and then is it worth it in terms of the time, or is there something you could be doing in the meantime to kind of help jumpstart you before then? In other words, is it clear?
So building a network when you don't have one is really tough, right? And so the things that worked for me was, one, when I started to realize that building a network was really important, I went to like as many networking events as I could, and I met with as many people as I could. I had so many, coffees and lunches, dinners, and phone calls, and getting to know you. Because what you realize is once people start to get to know you, they start to open up, and then their networks become your network, right? Right. The other thing was, I started doing that organically here in Baltimore, and then I went through an accelerator in Baltimore, which opened me up to a higher tier of network. And then I went to an accelerator in San Francisco, and that's where I got my big network. That's where I got networked with like the who's who of the space. That's also where I got the education from the who's who of the space, right? That's where I got to be around people who have been there and done this and could give me like real tangible feedback, and like that I couldn't get in Baltimore just because like the amount of people who had done it was limited, right? It is a lot of work. Is there an alternative to it? Not really. Like, there's really not really much of an alternative. Like you just gotta put in the time to get to know the people and grow your network. The only real alternative is if you build a company that is growing fast enough, people will find a way to work with you, right? Like if I don't know you and you send me an email about your company and you tell me that in the first 2 years you went from 0 to 9 million in revenue, we can have a conversation. Like, yeah, let's talk. Like I don't know who you are, but we can have that conversation all day, every day, right? Because money talks. But like the chances of getting to that point, that's the hard part, right? So like outside of that, like it's what you got to do. It's not fair, right? It's not easy, and this is what the advantage of going to one of those top schools are, right? So like the thing about going to like a Harvard or a Stanford, and when we talk about networking, is when you go to school, the people in your class become your friends. But when you go to like an MBA program at Stanford, your homeboy in the class who you go to drinks with after class is a former product manager at Uber, or was employee like number 120 at Twitter, or whose father is like, runs half of a country, somewhere in the Middle East. Like those become your core friends. And like, I say that jokingly, but like my best friend's brother went to Wharton. His best friend from school's dad like runs a country. Like when he got off in the airplane to go see him, there was a helicopter to pick him up. That was the only way to get to their villa. But like anybody else sees that person, they're like a high-ranking figure somewhere. He sees that person, oh, that's my homeboy I went to college with. Right. So we all do things for our friends that we don't do for other people. So when you get to be in another environment, those people become your friends, right?
Now, how easy is it?
And that just makes things different.
Right, and how easy is it then coming from a whole different culture, like you said, not having those access to those, the collegiate environments. You're from Baltimore, right? You got a great idea. I mean, clearly your path was you went out there and you did it. Is that? But do you think it's easy to? Well, you didn't say it was easy. I guess I'm just imagining some of the
None of it
barriers
easy.
to that, right? The cultural barriers or the comfortableness to do that. Like, how would someone go around that?
It's not easy. Like the first time I went to one of these networking events, I didn't know what the hell an IPA was. I
Right.
learned real quick that you get one of those and hold it in your hand and everybody wants to be your friend, right? I didn't feel comfortable being in rooms where I was the only black person. But then you find out, like, you start talking about business, everybody else wants to talk about business too. Like, that is an easy touch point, right? Like, it's not easy. The one thing I had going for me that I recognize is this is works for my personality, right? Like, I like people, I like talking to people. Like, I have the personality for it. If you don't, you better find somebody on your team who does.
Yeah.
Like, that's how it worked for my team. Like, the reason I became CEO, because me and my two co-founders for my first company, all three of us were engineers. All three of us were software developers. So they made me CEO because I was the person who didn't mind talking to people. That is
Right.
literally how that
Right.
happened.
That makes sense. Knowing your skills and your assets and deploying them in the right way. That makes sense. So, okay, you've heard of crowdfunding,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's some shift from VC towards crowdfunding, in that the VC firm itself is investing in these businesses through the crowd. What is your thoughts on crowdfunding in terms of these small businesses, particularly those from Baltimore, Newark, Detroit, that may not have access to Silicon Valley, right? To maybe use that as the route towards sort of this upfront seed upfront capital, friends and family seed capital, this first go around. What do you think about that?
I think it's an option, right? The rules just changed. So we're about to see for Reg CFs that you can raise up to 5 million. It used to be one, now it's going up to five. And it's an option, right? It's a way for you to raise money from what they call retail investors, everyday investors. The issue is though it's not a solve all, right? So it's like any other form of crowdfunding. The companies that we see do the best are the
Mhm.
ones that have a following, the ones that have a community, ones that already have a brand, right? Because you have something to pull from to get people excited about. If you just a company that just popped out of nowhere and you just put your stuff up on a crowdfunding platform, good luck, right? Like it don't you don't just put it up there and people like going to love your idea and start giving you money. Like you got to put in the legwork. So
Right.
there's still work there.
Right.
It's
Right.
just
So it's
the work is different, right? You're marketing to the crowd as opposed to going after these specific VCs.
Right. So, like you said, networking is still the issue. The marketing, getting out there, shaking hands. In this case, maybe virtually, social media, just really building that brand that folks are aware of who you are, and just really building that trust is what it sounds like. People want to see that. Okay, are you doing what you say you're doing? Even if it's virtually, you got evidence of it. Right? You got pictures and videos, and you're meeting people. Yeah, that
Right.
makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about Rare Breed, though. So
Mhm.
you were at Maryland TEDCO, which is a government sponsored sort of like VC firm. What was
Mhm.
your motivation behind Rare Breed, and are you like, what's this demographic? Is it a black owned? I mean, you are a black person, but you may have a nonprofit in the black community that serve the black community. You may have one black support staff, but the rest is white, right? So can you really consider what black controlled? I don't know. Let's talk about that. What is Rare Breed? Your motivation behind it, and is it black owned?
So Rare Breed is a pre-seed seed venture fund based here in Baltimore, looking to invest in companies all over the country, but primarily outside the major tech hubs, so outside Silicon Valley, New York, and Massachusetts. Right. My motivation for Rare Breed was there are two founders that changed my life. The first one's the one who's the reason why I'm raising money for Rare Breed Ventures right now. And it was a company based out of Dallas, Texas, doing something really cool, being ran by a Latin founder who's super smart, amazing engineer, had revenue, had big customers, had partnerships, and wasn't getting any funding. And so when I started to try to put a special invest, try to put an investment together for him, one of my advisors told me that they wanted to invest in all the companies I found and told me to go raise a fund. Right, cool. So that's why I decided to raise a fund. This is why I'm raising a fund currently. The reason I decided I was going to raise a fund and not get a job in one, that was the original goal, was like work at Tedco for a couple of years, get a job at a big fund, make some money, grow my career. There was a founder based here in Baltimore, a woman, who had an idea to build one of the most original thoughts I'd ever heard. Like, it was one of the most original ideas I've ever heard. And it was something in the hair care space, really unique, underserved, underseen market. And nobody wanted to support her. Nobody wanted to back her. No matter how much work she did, no matter how many connections she made, it didn't matter. Um, there was just nothing there. And so she was building a physical product. And so to get her prototype made, she decided to become a surrogate mother. This woman gave birth to twins for some money so she could start building her prototype.
Right,
And I
right.
got really upset and I was really saddened by it. And I told myself I never wanted to see that happen again. And so I knew in that moment I would have to raise a fund one day. And so that's how Rare Breed came about. Now, it's Rare Breed Black owned. I am a solo GP.
Okay.
I am the only full-time person. I am a Black man. Full disclosure though, I got a 4-person team. I got 2 investors under me who are young men who I've been mentoring and supporting. Both are Black men. One's going to Morgan State getting his master's in engineering. The other one's going to Georgetown getting his MBA. And then I have a venture partner who's a white Jewish guy. You know, and you know what? He's a good friend of mine, and he gets it, and we work really well together. Yeah. So, are we going to be wholly Black owned? Probably not. We're going to be a really diverse team, right? And that is the point, right? The point is not to be all one thing, but to be truly diverse. And that's also why we don't have a diversity mandate for our fund. Are we going to invest in diverse founders? Of course, right? It's kind of deals I like, kind of deals we do. But we're going to have a portfolio that's going to look like a melting pot that resembles the country we live in. And that's what we're striving for. We're not striving to be the Black fund or the underrepresented fund. We're striving to be the fund that invests in the best companies, period. And if you do that, there's no way your fund's going to only look like one type of person or one type of founder.
Okay, and I was going to ask that. How important is it that you are a Black man in this space? And so you mentioned earlier that, VC is VC. And being, Black VC just means you put a Black person in the game. Does it really change? But it obviously depends on the person. But let's just say with your background and where you come from and how you think about these things, does it matter that you're Black in this space, or could anyone just take your spot and figure this out?
No, it matters. It matters that I'm Black in this space, just like it matters having women in this space. It matters having older people in this space. It matters having disabled people in this space. It matters having young people in this space, right? Like all of that stuff matters because your understanding of the companies you're viewing is going to be different. So like one of my favorite stories about something like this is Pinterest, right? So Pinterest got a bunch of funding from Andreessen Horowitz, right? And as the story goes, as Ben Horowitz likes to tell it, when they came in and pitched, he didn't get it. He didn't see it, but they had a clear insight about their main demographic being young women. So when Ben went home that night, he asked his daughter if she ever heard of it. She hadn't. So he asked her to check it out. A few hours later, she comes down the steps and tells him how amazing it is and it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. That's why he made the investment. Now, if Ben doesn't have a young daughter at home, he never thinks to do that. But if he had a young woman on his staff, he'd have had somebody to talk to about it.
Right.
So this is why having a diverse staff matters.
That you're right. Just that experience alone, being aware, being knowledgeable, even if it's an innocent, because that's what, let's talk about right privilege. Part of that privilege, you don't have to think about it. Part of your privilege of being an able person, you don't have to think about that they don't have a ramp there, right? So, right, you're right. It's important that you're there because you're looking at these companies in a different way. Go ahead.
I'll give you an example, right? So we saw a company recently that I'm slowly falling in love with called Hiki, Hiki, right? It's an app. It is a dating and friendship app for people on the spectrum. It is the first dating and community app for people on the spectrum. I never considered that.
Right.
I never considered that if you're on the spectrum, like Tinder's probably not the place for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That's awesome, actually.
And the founder who created that app has a cousin who's on the spectrum. And his cousin came to him a few years ago and was completely scared that he may never have a family of his own. And that leads to these types of innovations, right?
Right.
But like, you have to be part of a community like that to understand those things. you have to have people around you in your life to understand how critical that kind of stuff is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to your venture partner, who was a white Jewish guy,
Yes.
the real question is, where do Black VC get their funding? So even if you're a Black VC or Black venture capital firm that has a mandate to support underrepresented founders and to be Black, where is this money coming from? Is it coming from Black sources, or is it coming from, like we mentioned private equity, and if we can kind of explain, get a scope on what private equity is like in terms of demographics, that may help with the answer. But also, just where do you get the money, and does that influence your decisions in terms of metrics and who you can invest in?
It does influence your decisions, but like you get your money from the same place everybody else gets. Like the money's just where it is, right? Like the capital's owned by the top 1-2%. Like there's nowhere else to go for it, right? So you go to the same place everybody else goes. You just gotta hope that those folks believe in the mission and believe that mission leads to returns and funding, right? And so, and that's the difficulty in it. Like there is no other source of capital, right? So you either go to high net worth individuals, so it's individual people's money, but that can only get you to so much because there's only so many people. Like there's a lot of people that can write $5,000 and $10,000 checks. There aren't as many people that can write $500,000 checks, right?
Right.
Then you go to family offices. These are offices that manage the capital of wealthy families. They can write those larger checks, but they, again, have to believe in the mission. And then you go to large institutions. So you're going to pension funds, hedge funds, large foundations, endowments in schools and universities. Those are all basically just bankers trying to find the best places to put their money to get the best returns. Mm-hmm. And so you have to make the argument that investing in Black founders or minority founders or what have you can generate returns, right? And so like the sources of capital, everybody wants to think that they can just go to like, if you're a Black person, you're making a fund to invest in Black people, you can go to Black sources of capital. Those Black people are rich people. They want to grow their money too. So like they have advisors to manage their money. They're not just going to give you money because you doing something for the culture. Like we manage people's money that has real consequences to it. Right. Like if I don't return this capital, I could be messing up somebody's retirement plan.
Right, and that's the point. Is investment for a return. Right. That's the whole point. Right. Right.
So like the sources of capital aren't any different from any of us. Yeah. It's just how you talk about the value that you bring and how you're going to make that capital turn into more.
Right. So, okay, you're starting this firm, you're raising capital for it. What kind of professional support do you have behind you? Lawyer, accountants, and so what's your experience with that too? Just overall, just dealing with that type of support in your work as a fund advisor.
Got lawyers, I got an accountant, I got, a fund administrator through Carter. It's a bunch of stuff you gotta use for your back office and things. The experiences, I'm a good investor, right? I'm good at picking companies, investing in companies, negotiating deals, helping companies. That's what I do and what I do well. I'm learning to be a good fund manager. That's all the administrative stuff that comes with the job, managing the bank account, managing the accountants and the lawyers, getting all of the information I need, making sure I'm relaying information to my limited partners, the people who invest in my fund, and all that stuff. And it's a lot as a solo GP. It's a lot of work. It's just draining. But I have found support. I will say that Black lawyers and Black-owned accountants are more than willing to defer payments and give you discounts to support. But you also got to make sure that you don't just get a good lawyer, a good accountant. You want to make sure you get a good lawyer accountant that does this, right? Like you want to get a lawyer accountant that does startup stuff, that does fun stuff, right? Because like there are certain nuances that are specific to this industry. And so there aren't as many in this industry that do that. I've been lucky enough to find some who support me and back me, but that's not always going to be the case for everybody, right? So I tell people like, and this is also part about being a minority founder in general, you also got to get comfortable doing business with people that don't look like you. Because in these spaces, there aren't going to be a lot of people that look like you. And if you only want to work with people that look like you, you're limiting your options. I can't afford to limit my options.
And that was that, and you're right about that, especially within the security space and in the business space, particularly, especially securities, really, the demographics, just like any pretty much industry, we're a minority. Black founders or Black attorneys are a minority. Black accountants even more so. I mean, I think they're even less than 1% in the overall, the industry. And so, because we talk about representation matters. It matters in you being a Black GP for that Black startup, right? And then also the question for you is, does it matter that you have a Black attorney? Like, what kind of value would that Black attorney provide you? All the skills aside, they know securities like the white firm. What would be the difference in having particularly a Black securities attorney or a Black accountant that's versed in funds and securities?
What I would say is, it just gives you a comfortability, and it gets you somebody who's probably going to be willing to work with you and go the extra mile. Somebody who's going to be willing to work with your budget in a way that other firms and other people may not. Right? That's what the real advantage is. It's like the advantage of working with somebody who has a cultural touch point with you, which is why we like working with people that look like us or come from where we come from, because we can have those cultural touch points, right? Like, if there's an episode of LeBron James' The Shop that comes out where he says something significant, I may get on call with my Black lawyer and we might have a whole 10-minute conversation just about that. I'm not going to do that with every lawyer. Right? It's not going to be comfortable. There's a level of comfortability I'm going to have that's different, and that's just a cultural thing. But I don't think that should be the guiding light when picking out who you work with. But I'm not going to say it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt, right? Like, it helps for sure. Like, when I found the Black lawyer who only did startup stuff, I was like, yes, we're going to do this. And he was the same way, right? Like, he basically chased me down.
No, that's good. That's good. We talk about that cultural competency and that representation matters, just even professionally, in terms of how they provide the support. What type of strategy can they lend you because they understand some of the challenges that you're going through because of that, similarity and just identity, right? So yeah, thank you for that. So it's, almost 5 minutes to the hour. I asked a lot of questions and definitely want to open up to others. But before I do that, what are some of the lessons that you've learned along your journey that you wish you knew earlier on?
How important building a network is. How easy it is to just reach out to people. Like, cold outreach works. There's a reason why, people talk about cold emailing and cold calling, because it works. It's a numbers game, right? But like, it'll get you there. Building my Twitter presence, I wish I had did that sooner. Right? Like that has been immensely helpful for me. Like, that's been great. And like, I knew this was going to be hard, but I didn't have the context for it. This stuff is hard. And just like, I wish I had taken like a good 2 or 3 week vacation before I got into the thralls of it. But I'm gonna go take a 2 or 3 week vacation like early next year, just because brother needs a break.
Yes, it's important. You can't keep going. You got to replenish yourself for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mac. Well, let's open it up. Shanique, maybe you can lead the questions from the audience or the participants, and they don't have one. I definitely have other questions, but I want to hear from others.
Okay, well, so far we don't have any questions in the chat, but at this time, if you guys want to put some in, feel free, and I will monitor those for you. But if not, you can go ahead with the rest of your questions, Elizabeth.
Okay, so while you guys are writing, if you do have any questions or comments, maybe the last question or one of my last questions will be, since the uprisings in the summer, right, the Black uprisings all over the country, we've seen, different statements from Google, Facebook, Netflix, Netflix putting Black focused specific movies up, right? And just really hearing these statements of commitments to diversity and including venture capital. We've seen some of those, even though we've seen some statements of they didn't know that, Black startups exist or something like that. But what do you think will change since those statements have been issued? Or how do you think the industry will change in terms of diversity and racial equity?
It just changed what the new shiny object of the day is. You know, when we had the Me Too movement, it was all about women and women entrepreneurs and making sure women had safe spaces. With the death of George Floyd, now it's about Black people, and like very specifically Black people, and now more minority people, but still, you know, very much with a Black lens. I don't, I personally don't think it's going to last, but what it has done is has caused capital to flow in ways that it hadn't before. And I think it's going to create a moment in time where we're going to have a generation of companies and funds getting money that normally they used to not get money, who are going to have to show and prove. There's going to be this moment in time of a group of us that are going to get this capital, and we're going to have to show and prove that we can get the returns and do everything that we've been saying we can do, right? But I will say I'm more encouraged than I was originally, because one of the big things I had, one of the big issues I had was you heard a lot of companies and VC firms talking about how they wanted to support Black people. What you didn't have was limited partners, these large institutions that actually control the money in the space. I ain't heard a single thing from any one of them. The other thing is you don't know who any of them are, right? So like you don't know about the railroad pension fund in Idaho. Like you've never heard of them, right? Those are the folks that control the massive amounts of capital in the space. Until recently, Yale came out and stated that they were making efforts to invest in diverse fund managers outside their endowment. And Yale has one of the top endowments in the world. They have one of the best performing endowments in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So for them to publicly come out and make a statement like that, that means something.
Yeah.
And so that was really interesting to me. So we'll see.
Yes, we shall. We shall.
We do have one question that came up, and I'm sure we have time for one more. So the question in the chat says, how important do you think it is to link limited partners who are interested in supporting underrepresented general partners to those general partners as a way of getting capital to underrepresented founders?
I think it's really important. I think the sharing of LPs and connecting folks to LPs that are investing that are investing in GPs who are looking to put capital underrepresented founders is important, right? Like finding people to invest in your fund is it's not easy, right? And so getting access to that means something. You know, I'm lucky enough to have a group of other emerging managers who we share LPs with each other. We share LP information. You know, I've recently shared an LP with somebody where the LP didn't invest in me, but they invested in one of my friends. And like, there's no competition or bitterness to it, right? Because like at the end of the day, we all got to get to the top together. So like, I think stuff like that is critically important.
And there's enough money anyway, right? The LPs and the private equity and all that, like enough to go around. But good question. Thank you for that.
There's enough to go around, for sure.
So we are at the hour. I want to give another big thanks to you, Mr. Mack, for taking your time, your busy time. I mean, this is a very important time for you. You're raising a lot of money, you know, just to chat, to share your experience, to give insight. I'm sure others will take a lot out of this, especially, you know, I meet, you know, so many startups or founders and businesses that are looking for money. Don't, like you said, don't have that background understanding of how to really get it the best way. And so this will be helpful for so many. And when I first met you, you're a beacon of light in this space for the underrepresented, for the underdog, for all these. So your presence is definitely needed. And I want to just thank you again. Thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate for the invite. And we have one last question I want to answer really quickly.
Oh, okay.
Somebody asked me, which major minority tech hub excites you the most outside of Atlanta, Dallas, Orlando? It would be Cincinnati, Ohio, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. Mark my words, in 5 years, Tulsa, Oklahoma is going to be a beacon of the minority tech world.
Wow.
So keep that in mind, folks. You heard it here. But it's been great. Thank you for the opportunity, and I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Yeah, and where can they find you? Let's do that. What's your social media handles? That's Twitter.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Matt Conwell, MacConwell. That's the best way to find me is on Twitter.
Okay.
Or you could go, if you are interested in being an LP in our fund, feel free to go to rarebreed.vc. There is a button that you can click on to become an LP. Our minimum check size is $10K. So if you're interested,
I put it in
I
the
will
chat.
take your money.
Well, thank you again. Thank you all for joining us. Again, this is Democratizing Business Capital, # Black Capital Matters. It will be, or it has been recording, and so you can catch all the pre or recorded sessions on the website, www.elcesq.com, as well as follow us on social media for all the upcoming interview sessions within the Black Capital Matters space, and that is both Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook is at ELCESQ LLC, and LinkedIn is ELCESQ. So thank you all, and look forward to seeing you all in our next session next week, actually. And thanks again, Matt. Have a good day.
Hey, have a good one.
Super.